Welcome guys. So two things happened recently. First, the devs announced that they are bringing DirectX 11 support to Guild Wars 2. They are going to be working the optimization for the game and the graphics, and a lot of people have been talking about that. Second of all, just in this past quarter, I got a new PC, and I've been really looking into everything I know about making Guild Wars 2 look good and run good, to hopefully do good videos for you all. Well, now with all that information on hand, I thought it might be nice to sit down and tell you guys what I know. So this video is going to be a guide for you through all the options generally in the game and all the different ways in which you can install and run and execute Guild Wars 2 to hopefully give you guys a lot of frames, because this is a game where even with the best of the best newest PCs, if I configure my stuff in a certain way and I go and play certain content, I will drag my frames down to single digits. It's a very sensitive game, it's a very poorly optimized game in many ways, and you have to take it into your own hands to kind of make sure that Guild Wars doesn't feel terrible to play a lot of the time. And there's a lot of fun, weird things that you might not know about. So really, that's what this video is about. So, well, let's jump in. Now, on the video right now, I actually have all the footage you're looking at here is my recommended optimized setup that I'm going to run through for you all. You can actually see right now, as I have the menu open, I'm hovering around 400 FPS. Now, don't get too excited. I have a very good PC, and the truth is that Guild Wars has extremely variable FPS. I may get 400 frames here. I may be getting less than 120 in other places. I may even dip below 30 in others. So bear that in mind. But generally speaking, for me, I want to be above 60 and as close to 120, 144 as I can get, because that's my monitor's refresh rate. So let's open up very briefly and talk about hardware. I'm not going to give you guys specific recommendations, especially because as time goes by, those are going to change. What I would say, though, is Guild Wars, even after the DirectX 11 update, is generally always going to favor the fastest CPU you can get. That's the really important thing. Even quite old GPUs at this point. Don't forget the game was originally launching and doing its final stages of development in 2011, launched in 2012. Even fairly old GPUs are fine. Really, it's a CPU-bound game. The CPU is the thing that you want to look at as much as possible. And particularly, you don't need loads of cores, you don't need loads of threads, you just want speed. Or at least as high IPS, instructions per second, as you possibly can get. The more of that you have, the better. And that's true for a lot of old RPGs and RPGs around this era. With DirectX 11, I think things will likely change a little bit, but don't expect it to too much. I would always say speed is the big thing that you really want to favor here. The other really, really big and important thing for the game that, you know, in modern era of PC gaming, more and more people have these, but if you don't have an SSD yet, get one. If you don't have Guild Wars 2 installed on an SSD, do it. The fastest drive that you can get possible, this game will benefit from massively. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting around in loading screens for a really long time. RAM speed is actually kind of important as well at this point, and RAM capacity, if only because a lot of panels in the game now, let's say I open my guild panel here. When I open, you see that there's this little bit of lag as I open it, and as I go to, say, the storage, if we have tons of items, like tons of decorations, did you see my client hang slightly as I click this? It's because it's loading so much stuff. Now, I've noticed through various rigs and setups I've had in the past, basically, the better your RAM is, the faster your RAM, the more RAM you have, the less those issues can occur. And there's some third-party stuff you can do to help out with that as well in just a moment that I'll be talking about. So yeah, those are kind of the big things. The monitor you pick is actually kind of important as well. There are two big things that I would recommend about monitor. First of all, 4K. 4K is actually a good option for Guild Wars 2, specifically because of what it provides you for anti-aliasing. If you're really sensitive to like scene crawling and jaggies and all that stuff, if you play at 4K, even if you are sitting at a desk quite close to it and you're not even necessarily appreciating every single pixel, if you've got it good enough hardware, good enough GPU to push 4K, you can do that. You'll get more out of it. I'm not 4K personally. I'm at the sweet spot of 2560 by 1440p. And I'm very happy with that, but I know I would benefit from going higher. So don't feel too bad. Classically, people won't recommend it to you, but I do think there's some value there. And finally, just an interesting bit of trivia. As far as I can tell, and from my experience of playing this game back with the convention demos, and even at the time of the game's first expansion, the developers were actually recommending 16 by 10 aspect ratio monitors. Like, that's really what they were looking at. A lot of the UI was designed for 16 by 10, not necessarily 16 by 9. Now, an ultra-wide and stuff will all work. There are things for that. But if you've got a 16 by 10 sitting around, maybe give it a shot, because that's kind of, in some ways, the most authentic Guild Wars experience, as far as I can see. All right, another little thing before we get to in-game options. Let's talk about installation and launching. So when you actually boot the game, you should definitely have a shortcut for it. Right-click that shortcut and customize some stuff in Windows for yourself. First of all, I don't even have to worry about Mac users now because they're not here. You can run as administrator. The developers actually actively suggest this. They say there's a lot of like weird edge case scenarios where people can lose frames because they're not running as an administrator. So that will get you frames. The only downside here is that if you're like me and you do streams or videos and stuff, make sure your video capture software is also set to admin. Otherwise, you'll have issues there. But generally, yes, run it as an admin. Disabling full screen optimizations is also a dev quote that I found as I've been pouring through and researching every little thing I can possibly find, so I have that selected. You can also enable compatibility for previous versions of Windows, and I actually always use Windows Vista Service Pack 2. And the reason I use this is because both Guild Wars 2 and the original game, Guild Wars 1, have over multiple different PCs given me a weird flickering issue on loading screens where my screen will go black and then it will come back very briefly. Well, if you enable Vista Service Pack 2, that goes away. And so ever since then, I see no downsides to it, so I run it. If you don't have any problems, maybe, you know, just keep all the parameters completely standard. So that's about it really for launching. I personally use NVIDIA cards, so I know quite a bit about the control panel. There are two big things for the NVIDIA control panel with Guild Wars 2. First of all, make textures as sharp as possible. You will see a difference in game. And if you want, you can use their global sharpening as well. Sharpening around 2.5 is nice, but that will hit all of the UI and skill icons and stuff, and it will start to look a little bit inauthentic. The way that I like to have my game look is good, but not too deviant from whatever the developer's intent was. And if you sharpen too much, it will start to look a bit strange. So obviously that's a preference thing, but I do like a little bit of that. You're not actually looking at it on this video for what it's worth. Let's have a look at the in-game options now. Now this is really where the major frame saves are going to be coming from. And I'm actually going to talk to you about basically all these tabs, not controls, but all three of these have stuff for your frames. Let's start with graphics because this is the most important stuff. First of all, resolution, full screen. A lot of people are going to recommend windowed full screen. Obviously, if you play with multiple monitors, it just feels better, flows better. However, if you really are a purist about how great your experience is in game, I do recommend actually playing fully on full screen. And the reason I recommend this is because it will reduce input delay, input latency. You will feel a little bit of a difference, especially if you're in like the faster game modes, if you're playing a lot of PvP and stuff. The downside to this is a lot of like overlay software and add-on stuff, if you're getting really involved with that, usually want windowed at full screen. They don't want straight up full screen, so do bear that in mind. But for this video, you will actually see I'm on full screen. Refresh rate, you can pretty much just ignore if you like. You can have it actually match your monitor if you want, but it's not a big deal. The frame limiter may as well not be in the game. I mean, it's so weird to see that they offer to limit your frames to 60 or 30 here. You know, maybe in the modern era, these should be a little bit higher, but they have it. You can ignore that. Interface size, this is largely a matter of preference. When you're on the higher resolutions like I am here, maybe saying normal is a little bit small. I tend to think this is a bit small. Text is a little bit small, especially making videos. I want people to be able to see that stuff. So I actually play on large. There is kind of a gameplay consideration here as well. If I'm, say, if I'm a warrior with a greatsword, or say I'm an elementalist here, I've got a fiery greatsword. If I'm going to, like, try and whirl back against myself, if I accidentally release while my cursor is over user interface here, the spell will fail. It will say out of range, and that can get you killed in, again, some of the fast content and stuff. So having the UI too big, if you're like really trying to panic well back or whatever, it has screwed me up in the past. So I would say be aware of that. Maybe it's too cluttered for you if you're doing raids and stuff, but to me, I like large. You could obviously go the other way. You could go totally super small if you want. It's a preference thing, mostly. Next, DPI scaling. So they added this. It says enables additional scale in the UI according to your system settings. Again, this is for people with really high monitor resolution. I have it on. My impression is it might do something, but quite often I don't really see it doing much. Like, there's obviously a bit of a flicker, but it didn't really scale my UI as I turn it on and off here. So maybe people in the comments can give me a bit of advice on that one. Full screen gamma, generally leave this at 1 unless your monitor is very badly calibrated, in which case you might be losing details by having it at 1. My actual recommendation to you in that situation is to deal with your monitor calibration issues elsewhere in Windows. Look up, Google it, do a guide. You can mess with gamma, though, if you really want. Say you're in a really dark area, like the Obsidian Sanctum jumping puzzle in World vs. World. You can use this to cheese visibility in places that you otherwise shouldn't have if you want. But overall, I leave it. And in fact, I think playing on full screen, it's not even working for me. I think I might have to be on windowed full screen for it to do anything. So yeah. Enable stereoscopic rendering, 99%. In fact, maybe every single person who watches this video is going to have that grayed out. It's based on the old NVIDIA 3D Vision glasses technology, which I actually do have and want to do a video about because it's fascinating and incredible and amazing. And Guild Wars 2 was one of the gold standard games for this. But NVIDIA don't even support the hardware anymore, so just nobody has this. I wouldn't be surprised if when the devs do DirectX 11, if they do a pass on all these settings, this might even disappear at some point. I recommend you guys try it out if you've got a little bit of spare money on the side and a bit of time to wait for the glasses to come in, because it is amazing. But yeah, most of you won't be able to play with it. Okay, so let's look at advanced settings. Now we can get a lot of frames. Preset, I would suggest not saying auto detect, not saying best or performance or appearance. You're just going to do custom for yourself. So it'll say choose. You're going to select these on your own. The actual presets here, I don't agree with what a lot of the devs have assigned. They could be a lot smarter about it, but hey. First of all, we've got animation. I say high. You would need a pretty old GPU to feel the difference on this. And there's really no aesthetic downsides to having this on high. Use advanced water animation and simulation techniques. Provides the best quality appearance for water and cloth animation. Really, I don't know why you'd ever recommend going lower on this one. Next, we have anti-aliasing. Certainly a bit of a preference thing. The higher your monitor resolution, the less necessary this stuff is. If you're on a sort of medium old card, you will actually feel a frame difference here. In which case, I suggest either going none or FXAA. FXAA, you're really not going to feel hit your frames in any real way. I personally think FXAA is a little bit ugly. I like SMA high with my resolution. But again, it's somewhat preferential. And on new GPUs, Guild Wars really doesn't stress your GPU much. You can put anti-aliasing as high as possible. You can even go outside the game and bump it even further, and you're not going to feel it. So I have it on SMA high. Next, we've got environment. Controls the complexity of terrain, props, decals, ground cover. Higher values show more detail, but require more GPU bandwidth. Some features may not update till the map changes. A lot of people don't realize this when they're messing with their graphics, but if I put that on low now, I really would have to hit a loading screen and come back to really see the full difference. Again, this is one of those things where really high is the only necessary option. For anyone on a medium to even slightly newer GPU, you're not going to feel any difference here. The only experience I've ever had of setting this lower is if you're in a very cluttered looking raid and you want to be able to see telegraphs on the ground a bit better. So actually putting environment to low makes the ground look basically like a plain flat surface and might help you with visibility if you're struggling with certain animations and mechanics. But overall, even that's a pretty small difference, I think. And I would just say go high all the time. Most of you guys are going to be looking at that. Thirdly, same story here for LOD distance. You're just going to ultra this, and there's really not many reasons to go lower than that. The distance at which rendered objects transition through varying levels of detail. So like if we turn around here, we see Corticus's Manor back there. Like maybe the chimney. If we turn this lower, it might actually get culled out. Even there, it didn't get culled out. I actually really recommend having this one on ultra because there's kind of nasty pop-in, honestly, if you have it lower than that. It just looks very strange. Like whole massive rocks and trees can appear out of nowhere. It's a bit rubbish. Okay, now we get to a really important one, and that is reflections. As you'll notice, I'm actually recommending none. So this is a little bit mislabeled. What reflections means is not all reflections. It means water reflections. That is what the studio is talking about here. So you can make water reflect nothing. You can make water reflect the terrain and the sky. Or you can have it reflect absolutely everything. Characters, the environment, and objects. This costs a lot of frames. See, what you might not realize is in all maps in Guild Wars 2, underneath where my character is standing right now is a plane of water. And sometimes that's very close to where your character is, and the game is actually rendering it, is actually trying to show it off. So even if you're not seemingly standing near any water, it can create a big frame dip. So I really don't recommend having reflections on. It's a consistent drop on frames in most areas of the game. And the truth is that reflections, this is one of those situations where you think, oh, well, they've clearly got better options, so I should definitely use them. But if we head to, say, the swamp down here, I'll do a quick video cut so you can see. You'll notice here that the waters don't look bad on low. They will look different if you put them on high, and in particularly where we're standing right now, I think is one of the pretty places because there's a lot of trees and stuff for them to reflect. So you can see that the light's different, you can see that the trees are here, you can appreciate more, certainly when it's on high. But I mean, look at the frame cost. I'm at 130 frames here. If I drop that to none, we've gone all the way up to 180. That's like more frames than a lot of people actually fully render on their whole client. It's so performance heavy. And generally speaking, I mean, when I know that it looks better if you put them on high, but if I just glance at this, I wouldn't say that the water is necessarily terrible. They did a good job with the weaker looking waters with the no reflections. That is absolutely my recommendation. You can try the middle step as well if you like, but I say just put it on none and forget about it. Next, we've got textures, texture resolution. Higher values give more detail on terrain and objects, but require more video memory and bandwidth. It's not supported on the 32-bit version of the client or the Mac client. It's funny that that text is still there, even though they don't support the Mac client anymore. I would recommend you keep this on high. New GPUs can handle this just fine. And in fact, in the NVIDIA control panel, I tried to make sure that the texture and filtering is absolutely as high quality as possible. And I have this checkbox down here on to override that and make sure it's absolutely brilliant. So render sampling, this is your super sampler. If you play at low resolutions, maybe you'd like to super sample as another method of dealing with anti-aliasing, getting rid of jaggies. But I actually don't recommend anything other than native. I don't think that subsample really gives you that much performance. And super sample is actually really weak in this game. It's only like 1.2 times the full frame size. So you hardly see a difference. Generally, I would say keep this at native. Next, just like reflections, we have a very big option here. This is shadows. This is also a massive performance hog. So that you guys know, none and low basically are the same performance-wise. For example, here I say none, and we're at about 186, 182, 185. If I go to low, you're really not going to see much difference. We actually have managed to spike down there for a second. I'm not sure why. It might have been something moving in the background. You're not really going to see much difference here by going to low. I never recommend none on this. A lot of people say just turn shadows off. But I say keep them on, just have them at low. You move into kind of a higher band of performance hoggery when it comes to medium and high, which, as far as I know, use the same technique, just at different draw distances. So, best case scenario, you might like to go up to high, which, again, isn't too expensive, but you will get a lot of nice shadows. You will see them on your character. You will appreciate them. So, I recommend either low or high. I do not ever recommend ultra. Ultra goes to, like, a whole other layer, and is a bit like reflections. It becomes, again, a big performance hog. You saw there that we actually spiked down to 143. We're actually kind of holding steady pretty well here, but generally speaking, shadows are very bad, especially when you get into content where there's a lot of enemies on screen or a lot of players on screen, because they're all casting shadows, and it can really, really bring your client to its knees. So I actually think that for most of you, the bar should be at low. You see how we just went up to 200 frames instead of being around 170? Yeah, that was shadows. So listen, if you want a TLDR of this video, if you just want to go to the comments and say, I don't want to watch this is too long. You know, I like to do the deep dives. If you just want the main thing, it's these two, okay? They are very, very important options to just be happy with having low, and Guild Wars will run buttery smooth most of the time for you. Let's look at shaders. Shaders are actually a really complicated and interesting part of the story here as well. This bundles a ton of different elements of the game's visuals in. Quality of shader effects, wind and lightning, lower to use cheaper materials, fewer textures. So, remember a second ago I said that reflections is really just water reflections it's talking about, but there are material reflections and stuff? Well, that's what the kind of stuff that shaders deals with. Shaders also deals with the ground as well. So generally speaking, I recommend high, because a lot of what you're looking at is in the environment. It's, you know, the rocks and the hills and the grasses as you wander around. To me, I play RPGs for a sense of adventure, so the way the environment looks is really, really important to me. So I have it on high. But what you guys should understand is that putting this on high actually messes with character aesthetic quite a lot. So, if you look at my character here, she's kind of like glowing. She's kind of like illuminated. There's like a global illumination on her. If I turn this down to low, you'll see she's not glowing anymore. And what this actually means is shadows will hit your character better. The sun will hit your character better. When you play on high, you will always be lit from the same angle in the same way. And what also happens when you put it to high, because of this lighting effect, is it washes out a bunch of more precise and decent looking elements of textures. So like some cloths and fabrics are like really well textured. You can see like the weave in them. There's an astounding amount of detail. But if you play on high, you lose the detail. What I'm telling you is that they're forcing you to have a worse looking character aesthetic by putting this on high. And material reflections suffer very badly from this as well. If you play heavy armor characters, or even just like certain skill effects, like the Revenant has these skill effects based around Jade that they can summon. These all look really crisp, really beautiful, really shiny, reflective, and especially like if you're a big heavy armored badass with a sweet shield, you might like to really enjoy those reflections. I'll put a demonstration on screen for you guys here. This is the Desert Shield that came out with Path of Fire, or one of the gem sets during Path of Fire. Look at the inside of the shield, at how shiny and reflective this is. And then yet when we turn shaders to high, that all goes away. So there is actually a game that you're playing here. You can't have the best of both worlds in Guild Wars 2 at this point. You can't have good-looking environments and good-looking characters at once. You have to pick your poison. So there is an incredible amount of merit to going low on the shaders. It can also clean the game up as well in terms of like skill animations and stuff. So consider it. Do think about this. They title it low, medium, high. It's really not a quantitative, slider here. This is a qualitative thing where there's every reason to run low if you really like Fashion Wars, for example. Next, let's go to post-processing. Very much the same story. Post-processing bundles a ton of features into it that really should be individual checkboxes. So I currently have it on none. You could put it to low, which would enable bloom, depth blurring, portal distortion, character outlines all at once. Or you could go to high, which then also adds light rays, tinting, and other effects for the best appearance. So I don't know what to recommend here. I'm still playing with this all the time. I don't like the character outlines, for example. If we go to low here, when I mouse over these fireflies, I don't like the white flash on the firefly, and I don't like the weird like orange outline that's on that. I don't like the blue outline that's on this character here. I prefer it when they're not there. The game feels a little bit more immersive to me and, less arcadey. So I would rather have individual control of that, and I don't. The bloom that is forced onto you with low as well, you can't see it right now because we're nighttime in a swamp, but in a lot of scenes where it's even just a little bit bright, like mountain scenes or hot sunny areas like Blood Tide Coast, if you enable either of these higher options, it will force the Guild Wars 2 bloom on you, and the Guild Wars 2 bloom is extremely overpowering. You will lose out on a ton of art, an incredible detail, and painterly effects that are in skyboxes and all around you because that bloom has been forced on, and it is extremely disappointing, a real shame. If you watch through my video when I talk about graphical post-processing suites and stuff, I nearly never have this setting on at all. I do it purely through third-party suites because then I can customize the bloom how I like it, and I can continue to retain that sort of detail. However, high does have some nice other elements. It talks about tinting here. Tinting is this really nice effect where if we were on this swamp right during sunrise or sunset, it would have this beautiful orange glow cast over everything. When we get attacked by like certain toxic hallucinogenic plants in the Path of Fire expansion or Nightmare Courtiers in some areas of Core, there are all these cool wobbly screen effects that get applied to you. In certain areas of very cold maps in the new Icebrood Saga stuff, you'll see that it really freezes down your screen and makes things look really blue and overcast. There's a lot of really beautiful tinting effects that really pull at the difference in the world. This here is a screenshot of World versus World with the tinting on it. It's so blue and frigid and beautiful in the Alpine Borderlands. You will miss out on all of that if you turn post-processing off. So again, you have to pick your poison. And it's a real shame. I wish that Guild Wars 2 let us just have individual checkboxes for the billions of features that they've added here. And they don't. Kind of sucks. Back to FPS for the last two drop-downs here. And again, just like with reflections, just like with shadows, this is really important. These are culling options. Just so that you guys know, when Guild Wars 2 first came out, they never had any culling options. The situation was that if you were around too many other players, it would kill people's frame rate, so the devs just deleted the appearance of all of them. And the game felt kind of lonely and kind of empty because you never really saw many players in massive abundances. You saw their nameplates, sure, but you didn't really get to indulge in anything else. Later, they added this big update that gave culling, and they were very clear with it. They said, okay, you can have control over this now, but listen, if you go mental with it, highest, for example, it will crush your PC. Now, that little fact, that little explanation there, that this is really a freedom and a liberty they've given you to be careful with, most people don't pay any attention to. They just go in game, they hit best appearance, and they'll ultra everything, and they'll think that that's appropriate and adequate. Let me tell you, the 300, 400 frames that my PC can put in certain areas, I will get like 10 frames, if less than that, if I have these two on highest and I go to a big world versus world Zerg fight over Stone Mist Castle, or if I go to, you know, Frostgorge Sound and try and fight the Claw of Jormag or something, I will lose all of my frames. This is where maybe DirectX 11 will help a little bit, but for now, you guys should not do this. It is never worth it. The best PCs around right now cannot handle it. You should cull these in. And I'm not just saying medium. Even this is obscene on the frame rates. My recommendation is actually this. I like to go medium and low. So I won't weigh down this video going with a really intricate example of everything that happens. But each time you tick one of these up, it will like cycle the kind of character models you see and how many you see, obviously. And there's a very big difference between lowest and low. So I like to keep it on low. I never really recommend going to lowest on either of these. But here's the thing. I recommend keeping limit. If you're looking for frame rate, keep limit higher than quality. Quality is the one that you should cut back on. Why do you always want to keep limit higher? Well, you're going to see more entities on screen. And that's important for some gameplay elements. For example, in one of the raids, there's a flak mechanic where a boss summons these hands of, you know, these demon hands that will try to attack your team. Those demon hands actually count as like NPC or character models that can be culled. So if you are playing with lowest limit and you go to try to play that content, you won't actually see all of the hands in the arena, all of these deadly AoEs that can kill you. They'll be hidden because they'll be culled away. And these are fringe cases, but they are out there, and at any moment in future developments, they might come back. So I recommend leaving this at medium, and if you want to get your frames back, go lowest here. This also continues to give you a good sense of player population. If you don't mind playing around 30 FPS, I think you can do high here, by the way. And that's perfectly valid as well, and you may even see that on several of my videos. When I got my new PC, I was really excited to show you guys some footage of massive Zergs on highest, but I'm telling you now, it's just not realistic for the way that the game is optimized right now, and that's a terrible shame, and I hope that it's resolved eventually. But for the game for now, this is the way to play. Don't do any other options. Alright, next we've got some pretty simple little checkboxes. There's really not too much to talk about for these, so let's run through it. Ambient occlusion. Hopefully you guys know what that is. It'll put like a little bit of shading, you know, in cubby holes and where there's hard seams. Guild Wars 2 is kind of ugly with it sometimes. Like grass, it can be really ugly. I have it on for the purpose of this video. You can see this grass down here below my options menu. You can see it toggling on and off quite well here. I tend to think it makes grass look really dark and kind of grubby, and I'm not too sure I like it much. I've actually noticed it looked actively bad in the Super Adventure book, so I always have it off there. Next, best texture filtering, as I explained already. If you put them to really high in your NVIDIA control panel or whatever, then yeah, toggle this on, absolutely worthwhile. Depth blur I actually do like, but it's an extremely subtle effect in Guild Wars 2. Like, as you can see here, like, we're looking way off on those distance. You'd think that maybe those trees would get blurred or something, wouldn't you? And there is, I mean, maybe if you're watching this video on 1440p, 60 FPS on the YouTube settings, and you really look, you can see that those leaves are changing a little bit over there. A tiny bit. Another vantage that I often really like to use is the Shaymore waypoint, and just looking straight out across the valley, which, you know, this is like one of the original vistas that the game presented to players, and is, you know, kind of tight. So if we have a look here, you'll see a little bit of changing maybe, but this is something I think the devs could go back to. It's not really an FPS thing, just a major disappointment, so I have it off. Okay, effect LOD. This is a very subtle option, but it's actually got a very profound impact on the game. This is what will cull away other players' skills to make world bosses and big Zerg content look cleaner. And generally speaking, I do recommend keeping it on. Now, some people will have in mind a specific combat animation that they really wish they could see, but this option's going to disable, and they'll recommend against it. So maybe sometimes if you want to be really competitive, you know, if you're doing raid progression or something like that, maybe have this off. But generally, I think turning it on cleans fights up so much, allows you to focus on what bosses are doing and what things are happening in the environment so much. I generally do recommend. The most profound thing that Effect LOD actually culls is projectiles. Like, if you're out there in an open world big boss, and you've got a huge Zerg, a ton of that Zerg are going to be pew-pewing with bows or auto-attacking with staves and stuff like that. They're big animations flying all over the place, fireballs and the like. They all get culled away, and really that's the big thing that helps to improve visibility in the game, so I do recommend it. Also, I have read basically every option here. I've done online research to see what people are talking about, and I have read enough suggestions of it that I will point out to you guys. I've heard people say this can affect frame rate if it is off, so maybe you want to turn it on if you're on kind of a little bit more of a dodgy rig. Next, you've got high-res character textures. I remember when this was added to Guild Wars 1, it was just kind of ported over from that game into the second. You might think this has a profound effect on Zerg FPS, so try it if you like, but I have never noticed this affect my Zerg FPS ever. Light adaptation, simulate the way your eye adjusts to light levels. This I don't recommend. You might think this is going to create like a cool effect where you walk into a cave and it looks really dark and then slowly you get a bit of visibility. That does happen in Guild Wars 2, but that's just like a default thing that goes on. It has nothing to do with this checkbox. What this checkbox actually does is it makes all lighting levels across the game consistent. What do I mean by that? If you're in a vaguely dark cave or it's vaguely dark at nighttime, if you toggle this on, it will just brighten the hell out of your screen. So if that's a problem for you, if your visibility is more important than any level of immersion or feeling like it's a dark nighttime or whatever, then fine, turn it on. But for anyone like me who values immersion, who likes a cave to feel a little bit darker, who likes a nighttime to feel a little bit darker, and Guild Wars 2 really isn't extreme with any of those things, do not enable this setting. This setting basically makes the whole game a consistent light level and is basically blander, so I don't recommend it. If you're going to be doing really wild, wacky lighting changes with a post-processing suite, suddenly this does become valuable because it kind of gives you a baseline palette that doesn't change too much, and you can have a consistent approach. But for general players, seriously, don't turn it on. You think it's giving you this new immersive feature, it's not. It's making the game less immersive. Next, we have VSync. Now, this is a tricky one too. Pay attention to this. My monitor only has 144 hertz refresh rate, right? And yet in this video you've seen it's gone well over that, so I don't quite know what the interaction is going on with G-Sync and stuff these days. I'm not that tech savvy with it, but what I will tell you guys is I had for years kind of rough, unsmooth experiences in the game. Like, I'd be getting high frames, but Guild Wars felt micro-stuttery and it felt choppy. For years it felt choppy, and then on a whim one day I just enabled vertical sync while I was full screened, and all that micro stutter went away, and suddenly I was like, oh my god, this is what the high frame rate is supposed to feel like. It was an incredible experience. So that might be something for you guys to try out here, even if you know, much of this other information I've already given, you kind of understand. That might do something for you. And then the final option is a result of the most recent expansion as of this video. That's Path of Fire. It's motion blur. It does nothing. Seriously. It doesn't affect frame rate. It affects no visual that actually exists in the game whatsoever. It's a joke of a part of the UI and a sad state for the game to have had it here through the whole POF era. It doesn't do anything. Now, there aren't really many players out there that will champion for motion blur. However, when I flew out to the studio, I played mounts with proper motion blur on them. Like, whenever you would do a raptor dash, it would actually do some motion blur for you. What you'll notice is it does stretch the screen a little bit. It does fisheye a bit. It plays with the FOV a bit. But that's not the motion blur. And I've played it and I experienced it. I really liked it. And I think it would look amazing on the roller beetle and stuff. But it's not enabled on our client. You know what the real crime is? It seems to be enabled at the studio. Some people have noticed on Reddit, if you watch certain ArenaNet streams, like the stream when they were announcing the Griffin to us, I think was one of them. When they stream at the studio and the Griffin like does a boost or whatever, you can see proper motion blur is actually there, and yet it's not on the live clients. What a shame. Hopefully the devs do something with it or remove it. I don't know, but for the purpose of this video, you can ignore it. Alright, so that's the graphics section done. There are some other little things to pay attention to though, so be aware. First, in sound options, obviously this is all preference. I won't give you guys a whole speech about that. But as far as performance is concerned, do pay attention to sound quality. My recommendation is actually to keep this on fastest. I don't know whether it's my ears. I don't know whether it's because I'm an imperceptive person. I don't know whether it's because of the quality of the headsets I've had in the past. Possibly a mix of all of them. But I can never really hear the difference going on highest quality. And there is something of a frame consideration there. So yeah, I would say just drop it down to fastest and forget about it. The rest of this stuff is completely up to you. up to general options. Now, there are a lot of aesthetic choices you can make here, and even a little bit on the frame side. So first of all, the content guide. This is the objectives that will appear on the top right. So right now it's telling me to go do my personal story on the mend. This, on older rigs, especially when it first came out, there were many reports that this was costing people frames. So if you really care about frame rates, turn it off. I play the game generally with it off unless I'm doing map completion, in which case then I like to, turn my brain off. And I always do the hide events and personal story version of it. So it's basically just showing me map comp stuff. Aside from that, though, I have it off. It keeps the screen UI looking cleaner, and it can save you frames. I don't think it really matters for most rigs out there, but for some, it may do. There's not really too much else to pay attention here. There's not preference. For what it's worth, I do think playing the game in other languages is really fun, and most people forget that that's even an option, particularly the audio languages. I doubt that really has any frame consideration. A big important thing that you guys should be paying attention to, though, is this block of check boxes here. Player names, and so on. I recommend keeping enemy names on and object names on. Those are both very useful in the standard fare of gameplay, but I actually turn everything else off. I don't like seeing a sea of nameplates around me whenever I'm out doing whatever content. There's actually a missing option for your own minions. Like, if I were to summon a ton of elemental allies for myself, I'm forced to look at this nameplate. If you play a necromancer like a minionmancer, you're just going to be seeing a ton of blue nameplates around, which kind of sucks. I'd like a way to be able to disable that at some point, but generally speaking, I like to have it as clean as possible. Now, let's say I want to see the names of all these workers off in the background. I can mouse over them, obviously, or there is actually a keybind. I have a keybind set up that while I hold it, it will just highlight everything I like, and like that player that's running around there, I can't see his nameplate, but if I hold the button, I will. And I just have muscle memory for that, and that way I get the best of both worlds. So that's something I do a lot of, and I really do think, whenever I watch other quite casual people playing Guild Wars 2, the game looks terrible because they just don't really look at their nameplate options. Lower down, I do recommend thick party and squad health bars, particularly if you're playing a healer. These are really useful. The dynamic HUD section is a new area of the UI I spend a lot of time playing with. A very recent update did this, but I actually think is really powerful and really strong. What it allows you to do is, for example, right now you can see my compass, but when I get in a fight, maybe I don't need to see my minimap anymore. So when I'm in combat, the minimap goes away. And then when I leave combat, it automatically comes back. You can do a ton of fun and interesting stuff there. And also, even better, that bind that I told you about that shows all nameplates, that can bring all of my UI back as well. So you may have noticed on the top left of my screen, it's very clean. There's no icons up there. I hold the button, I can get the icons back. So I can do that at will, and in that way I can get a very immersive, very clean UI. Definitely look at this and have both of these checkboxes on for the setup with the keybind, as I talked about before. Camera settings, you might think are all preference. Two things to pay attention to, though. First of all, camera shake. I actually really like camera shake. Some classes, especially like if you're a warrior with an axe or doing any kind of heavy melee stuff, camera shake really adds a lot of weight and impact to a lot of what you're doing, especially like on hammer skills. I love camera shake. Camera shake is also used as an accent in story a lot, like there'll be an avalanche or a cave-in or a dragon will roar or something, and your screen should be shaking and all the characters remark on it, but you as a player are left wondering, what happened? However, if you use camera shake in Zergs, your screen's just going to be constantly vibrating, and it makes a lot of people sick. Luckily, I don't get too sick, and sometimes I end up having that option on by mistake. I'll make a video and everyone will complain about it. So listen, turn camera shake on, but disable player camera shake. Now, that's kind of misnamed a little bit. You'll see on mouse over it says camera shaking from players or player minions, which can cause dizziness or motion sickness. That's other people, basically. So you can still have the experience. It will still occur sometimes. You'll have a bit of impact and a bit of weight, but you can get rid of it, spamming the screen constantly, especially in those big Zergs. Another thing in the camera section to think about is collision sensitivity. So this was an option added after launch to address a problem where if we were near a bunch of fence posts, let's see if this area here works well enough. My camera, as you see I mouse towards it, suddenly clips into this archway here, into this post, and like moves right next to my character. Now imagine that happening over and over and over again, and your camera just sort of going in and out loads. Makes people feel sick, disorients them, especially in jumping puzzles and so on. Well, they added this collision sensitivity option, which means if we buff it up, it will do a lot more complicated maths. But now when I mouse behind it, my camera won't collide with it. It won't jump in and try and move around that post. It will know to just ignore that post. You see? So we're actually a lot better in our camera. We have more control over it. So I think when this setting came in, most people just maxed it out. However, they say, no, moving the slider to the right may negatively impact performance. And that's actually CPU performance, which is what Guild Wars 2 is so hungry for. So I actually recommend keeping it on the very left. The other reason I recommend, and I don't really have any issues with this, the other reason I recommend keeping it on the left is actually having it maxed out quite often causes you to be able to clip your camera out of bounds, like through the terrain, and you'll be like looking into the void beyond. And those are just so incredibly immersion breaking moments for me. I hate having them appear in video footage and so on. I want the best stuff for you guys possible, so I just keep that on the very left. And that's two pretty compelling reasons, I think. The rest of this is obviously preference. I have a preference for lower field of view as well. I think the game looks a lot more immersive, though I appreciate a lot of people are tempted to play all zoomed out, max FOV all the time. It's up to you guys. Nearly done. 2 more recommendations for you guys. This next one I actually think is possibly quite controversial. It's something I fell in love with doing recently. And it's this here in the combat movement section. It's disable area of effect rings for ground targeted skills. So this may seem completely crazy and like a really bad idea that it will cause your gameplay to really drop off a cliff. But actually I have found that in more recent developments, any important AoEs at all that you have to dodge or really react to or know about, they are telegraphed with big orange tells, and they will show up even if you have this option turned on. This option being to disable area of effect rings. This cleans up the combat enormously. There are a crazy number of really cool looking animations out there in the game, like Revenant Mace 2, the fiery Mace 2 that you sear onto the ground, or even like kind of more subtle stuff. Like, do I have a staff on this Ellie? A staff would be full of these. You know, like if I cast a Healing Rain, there's something a lot more immersive about actually just seeing the rain come down and feel like we're in the rain without just basically boiling it down to and getting conditioned to just seeing a big white ring on the area. And especially, again, in large content with big zergs and stuff around, it's just rings all over the place. Culling nameplates away, culling those rings away, makes the game look like a real treat and kind of actually leans into some of the philosophies and ideas that ArenaNet had about playing the game's actual environment and looking at actual animations instead of UI. I really like this. Once upon a time, this was a terrible idea, and for years this was a terrible idea because there were so many like big mechanics that could one-shot you, and you would just have no way of really seeing them without the area of effects rings on. And there are a couple of places where that's still in game. For example, in PvP, there's a map called Skyhammer where this big laser strikes all the cap points. That is only telegraphed with rings that you would be disabling away here. And you'd have to have a really impeccable sense of the laser and the timing to get the correct dodge roll. So there are some very fringe places where this is not a good idea. But generally speaking, for regular PvE, I wish this was a default option to be disabled because the game does look and feel a lot better. And it's still easy to avoid a lava font. You just avoid the lava font. And it's still easy to walk into a geyser. You just walk into the geyser. And weirdly enough, when the rings that aren't everywhere, and there's not a million rings, and you've got to wonder which ring is attached to which animation, suddenly you can be a lot more confident about exactly what you've decided to stand in, you know? So I do like it. Give it a shot, guys, especially that stuff with Rev, as I said before. It feels really good. Like here, this would be just getting telegraphed as one big AoE, but as we all know, it's actually each individual impact is one, and we appreciate that more. So very, very fun thing for aesthetics. And you've been seeing on my videos. Finally, very last little thing down here with mounts. You may want to consider enabling camera roll or disabling. The only mount that this really affects in a big way is the skimmer. And you have to like, how is it? There's like a certain, I think you have to be like quite zoomed in and move sideways and then stop. I can't even really remember how to get it to trigger. But enabling camera roll, I quite like it when it does show up. Again, it sometimes makes people sick, but it might not make you sick. It's a personal preference thing. So there you have it, guys. That's everything about the in-game options and really what my recommendations are. That's how I really try to make sure, for general PvE, I'm over that 144 frame setup. So that I don't feel any dips and everything feels really smooth. Let's talk very briefly about community tools. There is one thing that you should really, really, really consider, and that's until the DirectX 11 update comes out later in the year, you should consider installing Guild Wars 2 DirectX 12 proxy. It's fantastic. It does even more to reduce micro stutter and make sure that your frames are nice and consistent. With the Guild Wars 2 add-on manager, it is really easy to install as well. Just like a couple of clicks and it's installed. Don't forget that once you've got it installed, there is a configuration folder where you can grab a preset for if you have over 8 gig of RAM, and I recommend that. You've been watching that in this video. Once you have it installed, try not to mess with your shaders too much because it will cause it to rebuild the cache and it will do generally nasty things. But overall, I do recommend DirectX 12 Proxy. After you turn off this video, just Google the Guild Wars 2 add-on manager and everything will make sense and you'll be up and running like super smooth and easy. You don't need any guides from there. That's the Guild Wars 2 add-on manager. For people who are really, really enthusiastic about it, do consider post-processing suites. Sweet FX and Gem FX, there's a lot of videos about, but they're old. I don't recommend them. All of these suites struggle if you're playing with high resolution or if you're doing super sampling, by the way. So don't do this at 4K. I would say that's just going to cost way too much. But if you want to pressure your GPU more, you could use the NVIDIA gaming overlay. That's got pretty easy shader access. Some people use G-Shade, which is actually a fork of Reshade for Final Fantasy XIV. And that's got some nice effects. I played with it, but it doesn't bypass the UI, so I don't recommend that. I actually still mostly recommend Guild Wars 2 Hook by Grenba. It's based on Reshade 3. It has slightly less effects than G-Shade, but it will bypass the UI. It's specifically calibrated for Guild Wars 2, and it does a lot of great stuff as well. So once you've got DirectX 12 Proxy up, look into maybe getting Guild Wars 2 Hook if you like, on a separate install if you wish. And through that, you can do a lot of other stuff. You can have nicer looking ambient occlusion. You can play with depth of field effects better and do all of those things. I'm actually not running any of those in my videos at the moment. I'm kind of going a very purist idea of what ArenaNet wanted the game to look like. But that is my thoughts on the post-processing suites. If you're really hardcore, even after that, and you're on an NVIDIA card, you could look at the NVIDIA Profile Inspector, which is an advanced version of the NVIDIA control panel. And through that, you can maybe enforce better anti-aliasing. I spent like 2 weeks really messing with a bunch of settings and weird developer flags and stuff on that. But in the end, I just didn't think anything looked that good to justify the performance loss from it. So that's not too much my recommendation, but you guys can think about it. That's the NVIDIA Profile Inspector. And that's it. That's everything I know about Guild Wars 2 graphics. Those are all of my opinions. That's all of my suggestions. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. And I hope to see you down in the comments. I'll be watching closely, especially if anyone's done like a TLDR of the major ones in the options, which I'm sure many of us do know at this point. So thank you all. I'll see you for the next one very soon. And keep an eye out on the channel later in the year when DirectX 11 comes out. I will review it and tell you guys just how good it was. Hopefully very. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see you next time.